She said I wasn't worthy of her, then she watched my success unfold. I still remember the exact moment it all came crashing down. We were sitting at the dinner table, the smell of garlic and roast chicken in the air, but I couldn't taste anything. Lily, Emma's mom, sat across from me with that cold, calculated smile of hers. We'd been together for 3 years, and yet, here I was, facing the woman who would decide my future, not with love or understanding, but with judgment. "You're not good enough for her," Lily said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that only made the words sting more. "Emma deserves someone who can give her more than this." She gestured around the modest dining room, the table we were sitting at, the cheap IKEA chairs, and then, her eyes lingered on my car keys, resting on the counter. She was dissecting every little thing. The way my life, my world, didn't match up to her expectations. It was suffocating. Emma's silence was the worst part of it all. She didn't speak, didn't defend me, didn't even look at me. Her eyes were fixed on her plate, the fork moving absently, as if she was lost in a world where I didn't exist. Lily's words didn't feel like a question, but more like a verdict. "You can't offer her the kind of life she deserves. She's used to comfort. A man like you," she shook her head, "simply isn't enough." I glanced at Emma, hoping, praying she'd say something, anything. She didn't. The silence was deafening. My heart sank into my stomach. It was clear, Emma wasn't the woman I thought she was, and this wasn't the future I imagined. I took a deep breath. Calm. Steady. I stood up, smoothing out my shirt. "Thank you for dinner," I said, my voice steady, but the words felt like they were tearing me apart inside. Emma finally looked up at me, her eyes wide, red from the strain of holding back tears. But she said nothing. Not a word. I didn't need her to say anything. Her silence spoke louder than any apology could. I smiled. It wasn't forced, it wasn't bitter. It was genuine. And in that moment, I felt clarity. Without another word, I left. The sound of my shoes against the floor echoed in my ears, louder than anything I'd ever heard before. I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. For 3 years, Emma and I built a life together, piece by piece, like two kids with a box of Legos, carefully crafting our world. It wasn't extravagant, no fancy vacations or high-end dinners, but it was ours. I'd always believed that if we worked hard enough, we could create something lasting, something solid. We had our routines. Tuesday nights were sacred, pizza, Netflix, and laughing at the ridiculous reality shows we both secretly loved. Every Saturday morning, we'd go to the farmer's market. Emma would always convince me to try some weird fruit I couldn't even pronounce, and while I pretended to hate it, deep down, I loved that she pushed me out of my comfort zone. We were building toward something. Not rich by any means, but comfortable. I had a solid job, an apartment that felt like home, and a car that still ran fine despite its age. Every paycheck was a step closer to the life we'd dreamed of, our quiet, simple future where we could just enjoy the little things. But then there were those moments, the little cracks I couldn't ignore. Like when we'd be at a friend's house, and Emma would casually mention, "Oh, Ethan's place is nice, but it's, not as big as ours." Or when we'd be out at dinner with her friends, and she'd sigh, "I wish we could take a trip somewhere this summer, but, it's hard with the whole budget thing." It was always subtle. She never outright said anything that could hurt me, but it was there, lingering in the background, her desire for more, for something beyond what I could offer. And I began to wonder, more and more, if I was enough. Before I share what happened next, the moment that shattered everything, let me take a moment to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever fought for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is far from over. Emma and I would spend hours talking about our future, the house we'd buy, the family we'd raise. It all felt so real, so achievable. Yet, as we grew closer, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was always looking past me, to someone or something better. Her family, her friends, did they really see me as their future son-in-law? Or was I just another stop on her path to the life she truly wanted? And then came that night, the dinner with her mother, that forced me to confront the truth I had been avoiding. The invitation to dinner at Emma's parents' house had come out of nowhere. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. From the moment we arrived, I felt it, the sharp, invisible line that separated me from their world. I parked my old car in their pristine driveway, the sleek luxury cars glistening in the dim light, and I could already feel the difference. It wasn't just the cars or the big house with the perfectly manicured lawn, it was the sense that I was being sized up, evaluated before I even walked through the door. Dinner was formal, too formal. The clink of silverware against plates seemed louder than it should have been, and the conversations felt rehearsed, almost like I was part of some performance. As Emma and I sat down at the table, her mom, Lily, eyed me with that calculating gaze I'd become all too familiar with. The politeness was there, but it was thin, masking something more cutting beneath the surface. "So, Ethan," Lily began, her tone syrupy sweet, "how's the apartment by the mall working out? Must be cozy, right?" The question hung in the air like a lead balloon. I tried to smile, but the words stuck in my throat. "Yeah, it's small, but it's home. I'm saving up for something bigger." Lily didn't respond right away. Instead, she sipped her wine, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "And the car? Still driving that old Toyota?" It wasn't a question, it was a statement. A dig. I shifted in my seat, suddenly uncomfortable. "It's running fine. Reliable, you know?" Emma sat next to me, pushing her food around her plate, her eyes fixed on the table. She hadn't said a word since we sat down. Not a word of support, not a word of comfort. It was as though she had checked out, retreating into herself while her mother's words landed on me like blows. Lily didn't let up. "I just worry, you know? Emma deserves someone who can offer her more. A better life. Have you really thought about what kind of future you can provide for her?" The room felt like it was closing in on me. My palms were sweating, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm working hard, building a future. I'm not rich, but I have a plan." I turned to Emma, hoping for some sign, some support, anything. Her face was flushed, but she remained silent, not looking at me, not meeting my gaze. It was as if I was invisible to her, sitting right beside her and yet, not really there at all. Lily pressed on. "I'm sure you do, dear. But Emma is used to certain comforts, certain standards. And frankly, I'm not sure your modest lifestyle is enough for her." She flashed a polite smile, but the message was clear: "You're not good enough." I couldn't breathe. The words felt like they were strangling me, suffocating me. I turned back to Emma, hoping, praying, that she would speak up, but she didn't. Not a word. Her silence echoed louder than anything Lily could have said. The girl I'd loved for 3 years, the girl I thought was my future, sat there and said nothing. Not even a whisper in my defense. I looked back at Lily, who was still smiling, waiting for me to crumble, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness for not being the man she thought her daughter deserved. But I didn't. I wasn't going to beg. Not for her approval. Not for anyone's. I stood up slowly, deliberately, my chair scraping against the floor. "Thank you for dinner," I said, my voice calm, too calm. "I appreciate your honesty." Lily's smile didn't falter, but I saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes. She didn't expect me to leave. No one did. I turned to Emma one last time. Her eyes met mine, wide, tear-streaked, but her lips stayed sealed. The silence between us was suffocating. She didn't fight for me. She didn't even speak. I smiled, genuinely, this time. It was the last time I'd ever smile at her the way I had before. "Your silence told me everything I needed to know." And with that, I walked out. The cool night air hit me like a wave as I stepped into my car, the engine humming to life. As I pulled away from her family's house, I didn't look back. The buzzing in my phone started before I'd even reached the end of the street. Text after text, call after call. "Emma." But I didn't pick up. Not then. Not ever again. I drove in silence, my hands on the wheel, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. The kind of peace you find when you stop fighting for a future that wasn't meant to be. I drove in silence, the hum of the car engine the only sound in the stillness of the night. I wasn't angry, though. That's what struck me the most. I should have been furious. Should have been cursing, throwing my phone, doing something to release the years of frustration that had been building up. But there was none of that. Just calm. The events of the night replayed in my mind like a film I'd already seen 100 times. Each word from Lily, sharp and calculated, each silence from Emma, loud and damning. For so long, I'd ignored the little signs, brushed them aside, thinking I could be the one who made it work. But now? The truth couldn't be clearer. Emma hadn't just remained silent because she was shocked or confused. No. She had chosen silence. Her decision to do nothing, to stand by and let her mother tear me down, spoke volumes. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a choice, a conscious decision to stand with her mother, to accept what her family expected of her over what we had built. And for the first time, I realized something I should have known all along. Our relationship wasn't built on love or mutual respect. It was built on expectations. Her family's expectations. And somewhere along the way, I had become just another piece in their puzzle, a piece that didn't fit the way they wanted it to. As I reached the highway, I took a deep breath and smiled. Not a forced smile. Not a bitter one. But a real smile. The kind of smile you give yourself when you know something has ended, but you're no longer afraid of what comes next. This chapter was over. It had been over for a while now, and I had been too blind to see it. The weight that had been sitting heavy on my chest for so long was suddenly lifted. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was free. Free from the expectations. Free from the constant questioning of whether I was enough. The decision to leave, to walk out without a word, had been the hardest and easiest thing I'd ever done. It wasn't about proving a point. It wasn't about fighting for something that wasn't meant to be. It was about peace. Peace that I had been craving for so long but had never known how to find. I knew I had given it my all. I had worked, I had loved, and I had hoped. But I couldn't keep sacrificing pieces of myself to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I glanced at my phone. Another text from Emma. Another voicemail. Another cry for attention. But it didn't matter. I didn't need to listen. I didn't need to explain myself. Not anymore. I got out of the car and stood there for a moment, just breathing in the cool air. This was the moment I would remember. The moment I chose me. I had no idea what was next, but I knew it was going to be something better. Because I was done pretending. Done living for other people's approval. And as I turned to walk inside, I couldn't help but feel something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. The months that followed felt like a new chapter one never expected to write. At first, everything seemed quiet, almost too quiet. But in the stillness, something changed. I started waking up early, not out of necessity but out of a desire to do something with the time I had. I hit the gym harder than I ever had before, pushing myself to get stronger, not just physically but mentally. The mirror became a reflection of the man I was choosing to become, not the man I had been told to be. I spent more time reading, diving into books I'd always meant to get around to but never found the time for. Self-improvement, history, fiction, anything that expanded my mind and made me feel like I was growing. Each page was a small victory, a step away from the confusion and stagnation that had clouded my life before. There were days when the temptation to check my phone, to listen to the messages Emma had left, almost overwhelmed me. But I resisted. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need her to apologize. I had learned something far more valuable. I didn't need anyone else's approval to be happy. I wasn't going to spend my time wondering what could have been. Instead, I was investing in what could be. And slowly, the changes became visible. My bank account began to grow as I focused on my career with a clarity I hadn't known before. I stopped second-guessing myself, stopped worrying about what others thought, and just did the work. And the work paid off. Promotions came, side projects turned into opportunities, and my life was steadily heading in a direction I had once only dreamed of. But the greatest shift wasn't in my finances or career, it was in my own mindset. I found joy in the small victories. The satisfaction of getting through a tough workout. The pride in finishing a book. The peacefulness of a quiet evening at home, knowing that I had made it through a difficult chapter and was now building something new. I learned to value the space that Emma had once occupied. The absence of her wasn't a void, it was liberation. A freedom I didn't even know I was craving until I had it. For the first time, I wasn't living for anyone else. I was living for me. And that made all the difference. As the months passed, I realized something important. I had become the person I wanted to be, not the person I had been pressured into becoming. My success, both personal and professional, wasn't a result of revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was a testament to the power of focusing on myself, to the strength of learning to be content without needing external validation. I smiled to myself one evening as I finished a book I'd been reading for weeks. It wasn't just the end of a chapter in the book, it was the end of my own self-doubt. For the first time in a long while, I felt a deep sense of peace. And I knew that whatever came next, I was ready for it. Because I had finally learned how to be enough for myself. I was no longer afraid of the future, and that, in itself, was a victory worth celebrating. It was a rainy Tuesday when everything changed. I had spent the last few months growing, improving, and building a life that felt solid again. But I was still missing something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then, out of nowhere, I received a call that would shift everything into high gear. A former colleague of mine, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, reached out with an opportunity one never would have considered before. He offered me a position at a company that was growing rapidly, more money, more responsibility, more everything. In the past, I would have hesitated. I would have questioned whether I was good enough already. But this time, I didn't think twice. I said yes without hesitation, and just like that, my world opened up in ways I hadn't expected. The new job didn't just give me more financial stability, it opened doors I didn't even know existed. I started meeting people who shared my passions, who believed in progress over perfection. One of those people was Emma. Emma wasn't like the women I had known before. She wasn't about appearances or playing games. There was no pretense with her, no subtle digs about what I could or couldn't offer. She was real, and that was something I hadn't realized I'd been craving all along. We met at a work event, nothing fancy, just a small get-together at a local bar to celebrate the company's latest success. She was standing by the window, sipping her drink, looking out at the rain with a thoughtful expression. I remember how effortlessly she seemed at ease with herself, how she wasn't trying to impress anyone, yet she was magnetic in her own quiet way. I couldn't resist striking up a conversation, and before long, we were talking like we'd known each other for years. We joked about our shared love for terrible pop music and discussed everything from travel dreams to the best late-night food spots in the city. What stood out to me was how comfortable I felt with her, how natural the conversation was. It was a breath of fresh air after the artificial nature of my past relationships. With MIA, there was no need to impress. We were just two people getting to know each other, sharing honest moments, without any masks. As we spent more time together, I realized how different she was from Emma. MIA didn't demand a life of luxury or social status. She wasn't concerned with what others thought about her or her relationships. She was grounded, and more importantly, she valued authenticity over appearances. There was no performance, no expectations, just two people discovering each other for who they really were. And I found myself being the person I had always wanted to be, not someone I felt I had to pretend to be. MIA didn't need me to be someone I wasn't. She supported me, not because I met her standards, but because I was enough as I was. There was no drama. No games. Just real, simple connection. It was everything I hadn't realized I needed. We spent weekends exploring the city, finding little coffee shops and quirky bookstores. There were no fancy dinners or extravagant dates, just shared moments that were infinitely more meaningful than any polished Instagram post. With MIA, I didn't feel the pressure to constantly prove myself. I could just be. And that was liberating. Our relationship grew steadily, not through grand gestures or showy declarations, but through small, everyday moments. She was there for me when I made mistakes, when things didn't go as planned, but never once did I feel judged. There was no need for me to be perfect, and that was the kind of peace I'd been looking for. In the process of getting to know MIA, I realized how far I'd come. I had grown into a person who could stand tall in his own skin, who no longer needed the validation of others. And as I looked ahead, I saw a future that was filled with promise, not because of what I could show off, but because of who I had become. MIA brought balance into my life. She gave me the space to be myself, and in return, I gave her the same. Our connection wasn't driven by need or expectation, it was driven by respect, trust, and the genuine desire to build something real together. And that, I realized, was the foundation for everything that truly mattered. It wasn't just a new job or a new relationship. It was a new life. One that was mine to shape, without anyone else's shadow hanging over me. And I couldn't be more grateful for the unexpected encounters and new beginnings that had led me to this point. I was no longer living in the past. I was living for the future. And with MIA by my side, I felt ready for whatever came next. It was a typical Thursday evening when I first saw her name flash across my phone. At first, I didn't believe it. I had moved on. I had let go. But there it was, Emma. Her name, the one I hadn't thought about in months, staring back at me from the screen. I hesitated before opening the message, unsure of what I would find. It had been so long since we last spoke, and I wasn't sure if I even wanted to hear what she had to say. But I opened it anyway. Ethan, it started, and my stomach dropped. I know this is out of the blue, but I need to say something. I owe you an apology for everything. For my silence, for letting my mother's opinion dictate our relationship, for not standing up for you when I should have. I read the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. The Emma I knew would never have sent this message. She was too proud, too concerned with what people thought. But here she was, reaching out after all this time, acknowledging the very things that had driven us apart. She continued, I've been with James for a while now, and honestly, things aren't how I imagined they would be. I think I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you go. I chose to listen to my mom and to what society thought was best for me, and now I'm realizing I was wrong. I should have chosen you. I sat there in silence, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Part of me wanted to feel something. I wanted to feel the anger, the hurt that I thought would come flooding back. But there was nothing. Just calm. I put the phone down and stared out the window. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to react. I wasn't angry with her. I wasn't even disappointed. I simply felt nothing. A quiet kind of peace had settled over me in the time since we'd last spoken, and I wasn't about to let her words disrupt that. I hadn't realized how much I'd grown until that moment. I wasn't the same person who had once begged for her love, for her approval. I wasn't the same person who had let her family's judgment weigh me down. I had found something so much more meaningful since then. I picked up my phone again, ready to respond, but as I typed my reply, I paused. Instead of the words I thought I would say, a single message came to mind. Emma, I've moved on. I'm happy now. I hope you find the same. I hit send, and the moment I did, a strange sense of relief washed over me. It was final. There was no longing. No wondering what could have been. Just acceptance of the present. As I sat there, reflecting on everything, MIA walked into the room, her presence as calm and grounding as always. She saw my expression and didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked over, sat beside me, and simply placed her hand in mine. You okay? She asked softly. I nodded, looking at her, feeling everything in my life finally click into place. Yeah. I'm good. Better than I've ever been. Mia smiled, her eyes filled with warmth and understanding. I'm proud of you, she said quietly, squeezing my hand. And in that moment, I realized just how much I had changed. I wasn't the man Emma had walked away from. I wasn't the man who had spent years questioning his worth or trying to fit into someone else's idea of success. I had found my path, and it was mine. And Mia? She wasn't here because she thought she needed to fix me. She was here because she saw me for who I was and accepted me. There was no pretense, no judgment. Just two people who had found peace in each other's company. As I looked out the window again, I felt a wave of gratitude. Not for Emma's apology, not for anything from the past. But for the life I was building now, one that was mine, one that was real. And I knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning. Months passed, and in the quiet rhythm of my life, I barely noticed the changes that were taking place around me. The business I had invested so much of myself into was flourishing, contracts came in one after the other, and with each success, I felt more grounded, more confident in the path I had chosen. The more I focused on what mattered, my work, my well-being, my relationships, the more everything seemed to fall into place. Meanwhile, Emma's world seemed to be slowly unraveling. It started with whispers, rumors that James's business was on shaky ground. His family's once thriving empire was facing serious financial struggles, and it wasn't long before the cracks in their carefully constructed facade began to show. I heard about it through mutual friends, people I had once shared my life with, but no longer felt tethered to. It was a strange feeling, hearing these things, knowing that the ideal life Emma had sought, the life her family had pushed for, was crumbling right before her eyes. And yet, I couldn't find it in me to feel satisfaction at their misfortune. Watching the disintegration of Emma's carefully curated life didn't fill me with triumph over her failure. No, it wasn't her downfall that mattered to me anymore. What mattered was the way I had moved forward, how I had built something real while she clung to a life based on appearances. Her engagement to James fell apart in the midst of his business's collapse. Her family, once so obsessed with status, was now struggling to maintain the same social circles they had once flaunted so proudly. They had pushed away the things that truly mattered, and now the consequences of those decisions were catching up to them. I didn't watch from a distance with glee. It wasn't about that. Instead, I found myself reflecting on the past, on how far I'd come. I thought about the nights spent lying awake, wondering if I was enough. The insecurity, the self-doubt, the constant pressure to meet someone else's standards, it all seemed so far away now. I had built a life based on my own terms, with my own hands. And it felt right. The more I heard about Emma's struggles, the more I realized how different we had become. She was still fighting for a life that had never truly been hers to begin with. It wasn't just James's failed business or her mother's influence. It was the shallow foundation they had built their lives on, the one that had never been able to withstand the weight of real adversity. And then came the day I saw her again. It was at a business event, completely by chance. She was standing at the far end of the room, looking much like the woman I had once known, but there was something different in her eyes now. A quiet vulnerability, a softness that hadn't been there before. She saw me from across the room and hesitated for a moment before making her way over. I didn't expect anything. I didn't know what I would say to her. But she was there, standing in front of me, the person who had once been such a big part of my life. "Ethan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw a person who had finally started to understand the weight of her decisions. She wasn't the confident, almost arrogant woman who had walked away from me before. She was someone who had lost, who had to face the reality of what she had sacrificed for the illusion of perfection. "You were right," she said, her words tinged with regret. "I thought I had it all figured out, but I didn't. I was chasing something that didn't exist. And now, everything is falling apart." I didn't say anything for a long moment. There was nothing left to say. Emma had already realized what I had known for so long, that you can't build a life based on the expectations of others. It has to come from within. I'm sorry, she added softly. For everything. For not seeing you for who you really are. For listening to my mother instead of trusting you. I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. You don't need to apologize, I said, the words coming out more gently than I had expected. You were just doing what you thought was best. But the truth is, I'm not the same person anymore. She looked at me, as if searching for something in my eyes, but I didn't need to search for answers anymore. I had found mine. I had found peace in letting go, in moving forward. I've built a life for myself, Emma. And I'm happy, I said, my voice steady. I wish you the best, but I'm not the person you left behind. As I turned to walk away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't about forgiving her or understanding her choices. It was about knowing that I had moved on, that I had created something real and meaningful for myself. I didn't need Emma's approval or validation. I didn't need to look back to see how far I had come. What mattered now was the life I was building with Emma, with my career, with the person I had become. And as I walked away, a sense of satisfaction filled me, not from Emma's failure, but from my own success. My own transformation. I had built something solid from the ground up. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I needed to be. The years passed by in a quiet, contented rhythm. Emma and I settled into a life that felt like a dream I hadn't even realized I was chasing. It wasn't grand or flashy, there were no expensive dinners or lavish vacations. We found joy in the small things, weekend trips to the local park, cooking meals together in our modest kitchen, the simple pleasure of waking up beside someone who truly understood you. Our home was nothing spectacular, just a cozy little apartment, full of plants and books and the kind of clutter that felt like home. The walls weren't adorned with designer art or the latest trends, but they were lined with memories. Our memories. The moments we created together, grounded in respect and shared values, were more meaningful than anything I had ever imagined. There were no outside pressures. No need to keep up with anyone's expectations, no fear of what others thought about our life. We lived simply, and we lived for each other. The freedom that came with this was intoxicating, a stark contrast to the life I had once known, one built on the weight of other people's opinions and superficial standards. Emma never demanded anything from me. She didn't need me to be someone I wasn't. She accepted me, flaws, dreams, ambitions, and in turn, I accepted her in the same way. Our relationship wasn't about achieving some ideal, it was about being content with who we were and what we had. We had each other, and that was enough. I remember one evening, as we sat on the balcony, watching the city skyline fade into the night, I realized something. This was the life I had always wanted, the kind of peace I never thought was possible. There was no need for validation from anyone, no need to prove my worth. It had always been within me. Emma turned to me, her eyes sparkling in the dim light, and I knew then that this was it. This was my new beginning, not because I had overcome something, but because I had embraced everything that truly mattered. No more chasing approval, no more pretending. Just the quiet joy of living authentically, together. For the first time in my life, I felt complete. Not because of the things I had or the life I'd left behind, but because I had found peace within myself and in the woman sitting beside me, the woman who had shown me what real happiness looked like. I wasn't trying to be anyone else anymore. I was just Ethan, and I was enough. And with MIA by my side, I knew that everything else would fall into place, just as it had always been meant to. This was the life I had created. Simple. Authentic. Beautiful. And it was everything I had ever needed.